Assembly.
Fair enough. Just a reminder that if people have tablet devices with volume on it, disable that apparently by pressing function on F8. I'm told. I'll take their word for it.
So just controlling F8, just turn off the sound on
that. And there is an obligation to declare any relevant financial or other interest in relation to today's business, although as we're getting briefings across all the department areas, I suppose that's a general thing. Just to remind people in the public gallery that if they have phones or electronic devices be put onto airplane mode, not 3G or 4G, put on silent and turned off in the committee, and the committee will be on camera. There is Assembly Wi-Fi available, and the details are in the gallery rules, and recording and photography are strictly prohibited. We have an apology, I think, from Alex, who may not make it, Alex Maskey. So the draft minutes are in the packs. It's page 5 of the pack. Members content that those are accurate? Great. Great. The chairperson business, the invitation from the Policy Forum for Northern Ireland at page 12 of the packs for myself. To chair the Policy Forum. It's in early, it's not to December, but the keynote seminar on energy in Northern Ireland, energy market. Obviously, it's going to be dependent on what business is going on, because it's on a Tuesday in the Assembly at the time. So I'm content to do that with that proviso, provided in case there's votes on, or who knows what business would be on the 6th of December. So are members content that myself, or indeed in my absence?
Well, Mr. Chair, if you're not available, I will be happy to, and I'll be content to chair that.
Yeah. Well, again, it'll depend, I suppose, what business is happening in the Assembly, and we'll give that health warning to them. There's an invitation from the Open University, page 15 of the pack, for members of the Economy Committee to attend the launch of a partnership between the OU and NICTU, is the Congress of Trade Unions, at the MAC on Friday week in Belfast. So I intend to go to that, but members are more than welcome to attend if they wish to go to that as well. And there's an invitation from the Assembly Business Trust on page 16 of the pack for committee members to attend a briefing on the newly formed Assembly committees on Monday the 13th. At 5 o'clock, that's next Monday, in the Long Gallery. Both myself and Steve, the Deputy Chair, will be speaking at this, and members, I think there's 4 committees in total, will be presenting that, just to update the Assembly, the Business Trust, in relation to the new committees and their intent and outlook for the new mandate. And so, all committee members are welcome to come along. I think it's in the Senate chamber, is it?
I think they might have moved into the
Long Gallery.
Long Gallery. Okay, fair enough. Well, it's in the building anyway at 5 o'clock. I think there is business going on to 6 next Monday, so most people should be about. But they're more welcome to attend, and there's some food as an attraction as well. And if you'd let the clerks, the staff, committee staff know by Friday if you do intend to go, I suppose it'll help for numbers and food provision and that. There's. Oh yeah, sorry. We did last week. Members be aware that we contacted a range of stakeholders who were, if you like, on the department, on the committee's list. I think there's about 30 stakeholders in all, just to advise them that the committee had started and inform them that we were looking forward to hear from them and work with them. Just a general courtesy letter. There are additional stakeholders, and there's a list in the clerk's memo, page 3 of the table pack. Some additional stakeholders, and the intention is to write to those people also, and just in the same vein to introduce the fact that the committee's up and working, express a desire to do business with them, and to hear from them. Did you want to comment on that?
Yes, I've already had a look at that through Mr. Chairman, and one of the issues I would like to particularly invite people like the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce, the British Irish Chamber of Commerce, and a few of the other business organisations that seem to be not on the list. And with your permission, and we'll get the clerk to write to those and invite them along as well, because I think it's particularly important at this stage, bearing in mind the sort of volatility that we're having in the sort of the economy due to the EU referendum and other issues at the moment, that we get a full view of the business community going forward. And I think it'd be appropriate for those organisations to be to come and give evidence to the committee.
Okay.
Maybe we should invite the Leave campaign as well, Chair.
Well, we're not going to get into
volatilities.
we're not going to get into the Brexit debate between now and the 23rd. But what we are doing is just establishing a list of people who we touch base with and say, as the committee does its business, and if, as it affects you, we'd be keen to hear from you and engage with you.
All I would say in relation to that, and I welcome that, I think we need to. I know for new members and committees, it's always exciting to try and get all these organisations. But the one thing I would just caution against is that we end up with briefing fatigue, because what we end up doing is having briefing, and I tell you, whenever you have 6 months of that, you'll be glad you get a break. One way that we've done in other committees, which is helpful, is if we theme them. But we theme them to the extent that any organisation doesn't feel as though they were, less than welcome at the party, that they're all there. Because there are some of these organisations who believe that they are more important than others. And, they're quite happy at telling you that. And so I like to try and treat them all with the same degree of respect as I believe they deserve, whether they're large or small. So maybe the clerk has already given some thought to the way that we would do that, but I think it's important because it helps us concentrate on what are the specific issues rather than going from Dan to Beersheba on a whole raft of briefings, and there's no connectivity and there's no sort of organised way in which we're dealing with it. So just a comment.
Just to be clear, that when we are writing to all of these groups, it's not to invite them to brief us. It's just to touch base with them to say we're here, we're up and functioning, and we'll be happy to engage you if and when the time comes. But I think the clerk has some ideas in terms of combined meetings rather than setting ourselves up 60, 70 organisations who need to meet.
Rather than bringing in people necessarily for briefing, we might actually write out with questions for them, if members want to have a think about that. But also we'd be looking to do, as Mr Story has suggested, themed stakeholder events, discussion forum style events. Because as members know, trying to get that many organisations through a committee would be nigh on impossible. So the stakeholder discussion forum, we have a number of different formats for that, and what I would intend doing is, once contact has been made with them, bringing some options to the committee for them to decide which format they particularly favour.
Okay. Fair enough. And if there are people content with the additions that Steve has suggested, and if there are any other additions that people want to suggest, now bear in mind we're talking about generic groups that cover the region. We're not looking for the Chamber of Commerce and Cullibaccy or whatever it is, It's
a very proactive
Chamber of Commerce,
Mr. Chair.
It's just maybe a poor example, but that's the type of thing.
Cullibaccy is never a poor example.
So that's, if people do come forward with, let's make it people who have an overall perspective on the work that we're dealing with, and we'll certainly engage them in the first instance. I think it's courtesy to say to people, we're a committee that are operating in the field of your interest, and we're happy to hear from you if you have issues you want to bring for us, and we will try and manage engagement so that we're not overly burdening ourselves.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman.
Okay, fair enough. Agreed then. Item 4 is the presentation from the department. So if the officials can come forward, we have Eugene Rooney, who's the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Economy, Michael Gold, Director of Youth Policy, Beverly Harrison, Director of Further Education Policy, and Mike Thompson, Director of Business Engagement. And I presume it's yourself, Eugene, is leading off, is it?
Yes,
we've had PermSec in last week, and we had Heather Cousins with one of the 4 divisions within the department, although the PermSec was at pains to point out that either the 4 sectors, they're entirely joined up and meshed together. So we're obviously working our way through as a new committee dealing with the new department functions. And we had, I think, in the Deputy Committee certainly, and probably the members of the DEL Committee had some pre-briefings, the end of the mandate as to how the new organisation was going to work. So some of us will have had some earlier look at this, but nonetheless there are new committee members here. So it's really to get an overview of your side of the department, the functions that are within it, and I suppose what's important to us is how that's going to link in terms of work to the rest of the department, because you obviously are a new department that's taken the further and higher education sector, the skills sector, and see how all that's going to work cohesively within a single department to have an effective outcome in terms of supporting economic growth.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll provide some opening remarks briefly just on what the role of my group within the department is, and how the key functions within that group interlinked together. So then maybe if the committee has some issues or questions around that, we'll be happy to take them. So thanks for this opportunity to brief the committee on the role of the group. By way of introduction, Beverly to my left leads on further education, Mike at the end of the table on business engagement, and Michael on apprenticeships and youth training. There's a strong focus in the new department and reflected in the structure of this group in bringing together the skills side of DEL with the business development role of DETI, so that we improve the linkages between skills education and the ways we can assist individuals and employers in support of economic development. Two of us are formerly DETI and two of us are formerly DEL, and you'll no doubt work that out as we go through this process. The title of the group, Operational Policy Delivery through Arm's Length Bodies, indicates two primary functions. Firstly, a focus on the development and the delivery of specific policies and strategies in support of the programme for government and the overarching economic strategy and skills strategy. And in doing so, secondly, the importance of good working relationships between the department and its arm's length bodies. Thus, for example, this group provides the main points of contact for 12 bodies sponsored by the department, including the 6 further education colleges, Invest NI, Tourism NI, and the 2 North-South bodies. I will now briefly outline the main areas of work covered by the group. Further Education Division has responsibilities for policies and strategies for that sector and for the oversight and engagement between the department and the further education colleges. This covers funding of the colleges, investment in the college estate, implementation of changes in line with the further education strategy, and the implementation with the colleges of revisions to the further education curriculum and qualifications. The Business Engagement Division brings together a number of DETI and DEL functions. It includes career service, training programmes, skills delivery, tourism, and various business sector initiatives such as Agri-Food. There's good contacts between Invest and DEL previously on the provision of skills and business through the Assured Skills Programme, which also falls within this division's responsibilities. And the work also closely between Invest and the further education colleges, and we want to build on those within the formal structures and the operation of the new department. So we had good relationships on certain programmes between Invest and the Department for Employment and Learning. We also had good relationships between the colleges and Invest, and now is an opportunity really to strengthen some of those interfaces, Chair, that you mentioned in your introduction. Youth Policy Division that Michael leads is leading on the work on the apprenticeship strategy and a strategy for youth training, and changing the way that apprenticeships and youth training are arranged and delivered here. These represent a major reform of the professional and technical education system, which will include reforming aspects of the curriculum, developing a suitable funding model, and a system of support and guidance for employers to engage with the new system. And elements of this new system are currently being piloted by the department. There's also work underway on the potential implications of the apprenticeships levy, which was announced by the Chancellor in November last year and is introduced as a levy on businesses from next year. The levy will be set at 0.5% of an employer's pay bill, with an allowance of up to £15,000, which means that those with a net pay bill of over £3 million would be contributors to the levy. The levy will be applied across the UK and indeed will be collected by HMRC, but the delivery of the allocation from the levy will be left to the decisions of the devolved administrations. And there's a lot of engagement at the moment with our counterparts in Scotland, Wales and in England on how all of this is going to be developed. The group also includes a small quality improvement team whose role is to ensure criteria on the quality of provision are applied across the delivery of further education and training and employment programmes, so that there's a consistency of quality across the various providers. Maybe just to outline what we see as some of the key areas for attention in the next few months. Clearly, the responsibilities that this group is taking forward will be subject to the views of the Minister and his decisions, and we will be engaging with the Minister on the various policy areas. They'll also be informed inevitably by the work on developing the programme for government following the publication of the draft framework and the refocused economic strategy work, which is now underway. So this group will have contributions to make to each of those areas as they are being taken forward. Certainly progress will need to be made now on the model of apprenticeships for level 3 and above and youth training at level 2 if they are to be introduced from next autumn, so autumn 2017. That's work that is in progress and will need to be require a lot of attention from the department in the coming months. The strategy for further education will be actioned through an implementation plan that has already been published, and this will be important for area of work for us as well. So there's a number of actions in terms of implementing a new further education strategy. Substantial level of investment has already occurred in the further education sector. It's evidenced in a number of fantastic facilities that we've got in the sector now. But some parts of the sector remain to be addressed, and work will be continue with those colleges on an infrastructure development work. So there's a lot still to be done in terms of ensuring that the estate is of high quality for the provision of education and skills training. We also need to work on the implications of the apprenticeships levy that I outlined earlier, including how it will relate to the apprenticeship strategy work going forward and how the public and private sectors would access funding for apprenticeships. And just to be clear, the levy will apply both to the public and private sectors. Following a review of tourism NI, which included a key recommendation that a new tourism strategy should be put in place, the department is taking forward the development of a strategy with Tourism NI and Tourism Ireland, which would set the direction for growth in tourism in the coming years and support the executive's new refocused economic strategy. 6 workshops were held with stakeholders across Northern Ireland earlier this year, with the opportunity to provide ideas and comments for the strategy, and the analysis is currently underway to develop the key components for a new strategy. Earlier this year, the Department for Employment and Learning and the Department of Education produced a strategy for careers, education and guidance, and that is to cover the next 5 years. DE is responsible for the delivery of careers education programme, and this department is responsible for the delivery of careers guidance. The strategy is committed to an action plan for the first few years, and we'll be focused on how best to deliver that in the coming months. I mentioned earlier that one of the priorities of the group will be to improve and match skills of business and business needs. We'll be looking with Invest and the colleges and how the employers currently interface with us as a department, including across our arm's length bodies, so that the skills and employees are relevant to the businesses to ensure economic growth. We want to see clearly if there's more that we can do now that we're all under the same roof, and to make the services even more joined up. So that's obviously a key initial consideration for a new department, which brings together all the components that the DEL and DETI previously had. So I've outlined the role, structures and main areas for priority for the coming months of work by this group. I know we'll be engaged clearly with the committee on details of a lot of these areas in the coming months, and I'm aware the committee has requested briefings on both the strategies I've mentioned and other strategies that had been put in place, and briefs will be coming forward for the committee on the details of each of those. But at this point, we'd be happy to take any points or questions from the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. It was remiss of me at the start not to welcome Tom Buchanan to his first committee meeting. I know he missed it last week. You're very welcome to join us. Just a few questions, particularly around the HE, FE and the skills sectors. Obviously, there's going to be a very significant focus on that going forward, because it's an area that has been under-resourced. I think that's recognised over the last number of years. And it's also an area that's key if we're going to attract investment and attempt to stimulate growth in the economy. In terms of the structure of the department, HE and FE are in separate areas. Now, we had, I think Heather Cousins in last week, and she was saying that was to make sure that the Dell block wasn't just located within one section of the department. But are there arrangements to make sure, because skills will go not just in apprenticeships and HE, and FE, but it will go through into HE as well. And so, are those linkages very firm? Just a couple of questions. That we're keen, perhaps at some stage, to see the action plan that you've agreed, because there is a skills deficit, particularly in relation to the, if you like, the traditional trades, certainly in construction. Any of the FE colleges and the Construction Employers Federation that we've been speaking to have outlined a real concern about a lack of skills, a lack of skilled apprentices coming through, and that may mean then, if the construction sector gets any type of uplift, that there isn't actually people here to be employed in the sector. So I'm wondering how the action plan makes attractive. I mean, I was told last week in the whole Southern Regional College area there are only 2 apprentices come through in the entire area. That goes from Craigavon right through Armagh to South Down. 2 apprentices were, if there's any uplift in construction, that's deeply worrying. So I would be maybe keen at a further stage to see the action plan that you have worked out with DAE in terms of trying to direct young people into construction and other more traditional sectors. And the last question is just in terms of capital investment. You identify that there has been significant investment in FE, but there obviously is further investment required. How secure or how confident are you going forward that the department will be able to secure the necessary capital investment?
Chair, just on the action plan, the careers action plan, that we can provide that to the committee. I think you're also touching on issues of further education and the apprenticeships strategy where there is engagement also with the colleges. We are joined up with the colleges in terms of how we take forward the implementation of the strategies, and we can certainly provide the committee with details as to how those action plans have been put in place. So you'd see the actions that we propose to take forward, subject to the views of the Minister. Of course, these are.
And also how it's joined up with higher education, because I mean there is a linkage right through the three.
I think, the higher education, we are determined that we won't work in silos in the department. And I outlined, this group is very much consisting of the business sector role of DETI with the skills and education training role of DEL. So we've tried to integrate, and we are continuing to do so. And as I said, we have work that we are planning to actually see what more we need to do to make those joins. Higher education, inevitably, as well. We will be working with our colleagues in the higher education side of the department. And I know you'll be getting a briefing on the strategic policy group. Now, within the strategic policy group, there's a clear remit to make those linkages for strategic policy direction, including further education and higher education. So that group, when you hear a briefing on that, you'll see that that is structured to try and bring the economic strategy, the skills strategy, and the areas of work that I'm responsible for and Heather's responsible for, to make sure that they're aligned, consistent and coherent in how they're taken forward. So, clearly we will be engaging both within the department and with the relevant sectors, the universities and the FE colleges, as to what their perspectives are on how best to do that. But within the department, we certainly have put in place arrangements to try and make sure that that happens. So capital investment, you mentioned, maybe I'll ask Beverly just to outline exactly what that engagement has been for the further education sector. At the moment, it's very much working with the colleges to develop the investment proposals. We know resources are tight. There is no guarantees of resources, but we have to make our case in terms of both the condition of the current estate and also the value that investment will bring in terms of modernising the facilities, And we have a highly regarded FE sector here, and we want to make sure that they have the resources to deliver on the wide range of skills and education programmes that this economy will need if it's going to contribute fully to the programme for government and the economic strategy. But maybe Beverly has been in touch with the colleges on investments and what their proposals are, so maybe just to outline that.
So in the past 10 years, we have spent 250 million in the sector, and there are plans to spend around 2.4 million in the next period of time, and that would be covered by 7 projects. So in the Southern Regional College area, there are new build campuses planned for Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon. And the Craigavon campus will replace the campuses at Lurgan and Portadown. And those projects are currently ongoing. They're at the design stage. In Northern Ireland Regional College, there are 2 new build campuses planned, one in Coleraine and the second one in Ballymena, and that's in the current site, but extending into St Patrick's Barracks. And the business case has been approved for that, and the project structures are currently being developed. In South West region, then there's a new build campus in Enniskillen, in the former Erne Hospital site. And then finally, in the North West region, there's a refurbishment of Springtown campus, and yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Maybe
The question is the capital for all of that.
Yeah.
It's grand having the plans, but I mean, obviously you're doing it in anticipation of being able to fight your corner in terms of this, and I think you're correct. The capital investment in has helped and will produce colleges and institutions that are fit for purpose in terms of supporting people's education and upskilling and being able for work and supporting the growth of the economy. So it's important, as I'm sure in other departments, we have important capital projects too. But what have you been told the capital picture is like going forward?
We've secured some of the capital at this stage, but we could provide further details of that.
Until the budget process is progressed this year, covering the years 17-18 to 2021, we don't have any allocations confirmed. As Beverly has outlined, we have got work in progress with the colleges to put together the cases for investment in the sector. But we are competing with other priorities, investment priorities across the estate, the public sector estate. So we will, if we don't do the work, we'll have no case. So making a compelling case and making a case as to the benefits that investment in the sector can bring, I think is what we're about, and we're working closely with the colleges to do that. But we will not have any commitment to budgets, and we don't have any commitment to budgets on the resource side post this year either. So all of that will have to be worked out in regard to the budget process and how the budget process supports the programme for government outcomes that the executive wants to deliver. So that's our input. Maybe, Chair, you mentioned construction, and Michael just provide a brief update on sort of how that's been planned at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth reminding everybody that an apprenticeship is a job, and so the low numbers that you referred to from the college reflects the fact that the construction industry has been in difficulty since the recession. There is training provision for the construction trades and the traditional trades, as you call them, through Training for Success in the further education colleges, where a young person who is unemployed but wants to take a vocational, professional and technical qualification in that sector can go ahead and do it. We recognise the opportunity for construction companies coming forward, not least because of the implication of the apprenticeship levy on them. And today the Minister is launching a new higher level apprenticeship in construction with the Institute of Civil Engineers. and we will have 40 young people will be given an opportunity to train, have work, train and move up into degree level. So again, it's that connection between apprenticeships, further education and higher education.
Okay, thank you. Mervyn?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Eugene and your team for your presentation and also for the work that you continue to do. Going back to the issue in relation to the changes that you mentioned, Eugene, around the curriculum, I always do get concerned when I hear departments talking about we're going to work outside the silo and it's all going to be joined up. And then when you look at the way that it's all disjointed, you wonder how really will it work. Because here you have an issue where careers on one hand has been looked after by DE, and you have guidance that's been looked after by yourselves. And how are we going to ensure that if we're then going to change elements of the curriculum, that it all does fit? Because the problem to date has been that it all works to a point and then it falls off the radar, then we have to pick it up again somewhere else. It's not disjointed. And what engagement are we going to have with the educational providers, not the system, i.e. as in the departments, but actually listen to the teachers, listen to the lecturers, listen to those who deliver the service. And as I raised here last week again, I know this is a bad place for having hobby horses, but they'll always appear. The entitlement framework is in total disarray at the minute. Personally, should have been binned anyway, it never should have been introduced. But how are we going to ensure that the needs of the pupils are at the heart of this, so that we have that continuum that continues from preschool, primary school, post-primary, further higher education, in a way that meets their needs and not the needs of the system?
You're absolutely right in terms of the relationships that we have to have with the education sector as a whole, not just the education sector. That is a responsibility of this department. And there are, for example, in the careers strategy, that is a joint DEL production. The action plan will be jointly taken forward between this department and the Department of Education. On the curriculum issues, both affecting apprenticeships and further education, there will be engagement as well. And maybe, Michael, I'll just ask you to outline, what that contact has been. But we, from the point of view of the young person or any other member who is of society who's looking for the joins between the various provision, they're not going to be looking for, I'll go to the department for the economy for this, and I'll go to. Yeah. They want to see how it's joined up on the ground. Our challenge in terms of an outcome-based programme for government is to try and make sure that we are working well with DE and the sector bodies that they have to make sure that happens. But maybe, Michael, just to cover the apprenticeships and youth training stuff.
Thank you. On the apprenticeships and youth training, we have engaged with 6 experts, curriculum experts from the further education colleges. The initial phase of the project, we've had them working in the department, seconded into the department to help us develop the processes and the components of a new curriculum, and also the pedagogy, how we would teach it. So in terms of this project-based learning, which most developed economies are moving towards, that's what we aspire to as well. In relation to the issues that you raise about the entitlement framework and the relationship with the Department of Education, we've had very, very initial conversations with the likes of the Curriculum Council and CCEA, and looking, as they have developed new content or new curriculum for the schools in relation to, I'm thinking of ICT in particular, that there's a recognition there that the old ICT A-level wasn't fit for purpose for the industry needs, so they developed a new software development, software and systems development A-level, and it have plans for software and systems to GCSE. We've been in very initial discussions with them looking at if that's okay for schools, why would the content and the actual, what you're asking the individuals to do, why would that not work in the professional and technical side as well? So we're trying to see if we can find similarities between what is taught in school and what would be taught through further education. The development, I think, of also the 14 to 19-year-old strategy should help bring all that together.
And it's progressing.
Yes.
And just in preparing for restructuring and the bringing together of the DETI functions with most of the DEL functions into the new department. You know, we had some meetings with business representatives just to get their perspective. As it said, you know, that there's clearly from the school sector, the youth, the young person's perspective is very important in terms of service provision for the adult population as well, and the work that we're doing across the various strategies will also address, you know, the needs of the adult population. But the business, they were actually saying, you know, can you join up with education from schools and the economy more? So that was a message that we were taking receipt of in the work that we were doing leading up to the creation of the new department in May. So we have some actions in place already through the various strategies that you've heard about this morning, but we recognise from those that are either in business or in schools or in the wider workforce that we need to make sure that the joins are working effectively across both the school sector and the FE, HE and wider training provision that we provide.
Okay, and just finally, and I'm not going to make any comment in relation to the cabinet bill. The former minister and I have discussed that one in relation to the Northern Regional College.
Remind me that the decision was signed off by DFP.
Dealt with my approval, I have to say. As far as the apprenticeship levy is concerned, and obviously there's a lot of concern out there, and given the fact that the threshold is for a pay bill in excess of 3 million, but the implications that it has for particularly some of our very important, all important businesses in terms of their contribution to the economy, but the concerns that have been raised about how this is going to be implemented. I know in my previous role when I met my colleagues in Wales and Scotland, they had a particular concern about it too. Where are we at trying to mitigate against that and bringing along an apprenticeship levy which is fit for purpose and actually doesn't have the detrimental impact on the intention of the levy? While the intention's good, it's how it's actually implemented and the unforeseen and the unmanaged or unmeasured consequences that it possibly could have for the local employers.
I think there's a lot of detail still to be worked out on this. You know, the levy was announced late last year, with BIS and Treasury leading on the application of the levy, but with ourselves in Scotland and Wales trying to really understand how it's going to be administered by the UK government, and then what the implications are in terms of our local businesses. You know, that is work in progress. Michael and I were at a CBI event last Thursday, and with representatives from both public sector, private sector, and community sector there, and there were a wide range of issues just about, you know, the various interests of those sectors in what the levy will mean in terms of their access to funding for apprenticeships. The levy will happen. You know, it will be applied. It will be collected by Customs and Revenue. So the issue is, what is the amount that Northern Ireland will benefit from, and then a decision clearly by the administration here and the administration in Scotland and Wales as devolved administrations on how that is used. So you know, we still have a lot of work to think through on that. And Michael, is there anything you want to add from the detailed discussions that have been going on with Scotland and Wales?
We're very aware of the concerns from the employers here, particularly as it comes on top of the national living wage and the pension contributions, plus then those that bring in people from outside the EEA. There will be a skills surcharge as well. So we're very concerned and have heard the issues raised by employers. What we're with the other devolved administrations, we have our own policies on apprenticeships, and we're trying to ensure that those policies aren't diluted, because what England will accept as an apprentice is different from what our new strategy on apprenticeships will actually set out to try and do. We believe what we have is right for the regional economy, and that's been supported by our work to date on the strategy. But we're trying now to work out how can we ensure that employers who pay into the levy have access to it for training to improve productivity. But we don't want that to dilute the policies that we put in place and the strategy for apprenticeships and youth training.
Thank you.
Okay, Steve, and then Gordon Dunn, and then Stephen Farry.
Yeah, just going, Eugene, and thank you very much indeed for your team for coming along to briefing us as well. And my question again is about the apprenticeship level and a few other questions that are involved around it as well. One of the things that you've probably already done, forecasting ahead, is kind of revenue it's likely that the Treasury are going to give us coming towards from the apprenticeship level and coming into Northern Ireland, whether that's going to be used specifically for the training of apprenticeships or it's going to be used to help fund further education, or is it going to go into the general plot? And I'd be quite interested to hear some of your views and perspectives about sort of the studies and the plans that will be going forward on that, what we're thinking to do that as well. You're also very aware that sort of the discussions across, and I'm glad to hear that you were listening to what the CBI and probably the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce have been saying, a lot of the policy documents that they've been discussing around the apprenticeship levy. But one of the key things is the idea about upskilling, and there's concern that this is just going to be used as another tax in business, that it's not going to go for what its purpose is about, which is upskilling. And I'd like to know what the department is doing about particularly to ensuring that whatever is going forward as policy documents and areas to be considered, that the views particularly of business are being fully incorporated in these ideas. As I noticed with interest, you did talk about quite clearly about you've been discussing with further education colleges, you've been discussing widely across government, but I noticed the last part you said at the end you'd been talking to the business community. And coming from a business community background, I would suggest that we should be talking to the business community first, particularly with the other regions that are involved as well, so we can get a sort of a commonality of approach. And the final thing is actually forgive me because I'm not fully up to speed with this, but what is the net benefit of having a differing apprenticeship model here in Northern Ireland to the rest of the United Kingdom? Because, of course, many of our companies work throughout the United Kingdom, and one of the great things about the Northern Ireland workforce is that it's highly skilled and it can be used anywhere. You just have to look at the number of contractor workers who've come from Bombardier, who'd be working in Airbus in Bristol. Some of the people would be working in Rolls-Royce, some of the people working in the automobile industry, particularly those in the northeast of England. If we have a different standard of apprenticeship here in Northern Ireland, how can that be equated to jobs and roles and also sort of union recognition and wider recognition within the United Kingdom? Those are just if you could answer those points.
You've covered a wide range of issues in terms of those points, and a lot of those, and some of those issues, as I was outlining earlier, are still being subject to resolution.
But just to interject there, Sonia, I'm sorry to interrupt, but of course, when's the levy's kicking off fairly soon, and we're already seeing Scottish Government are making announcements about what they're planning to do. The regions within England are already looking at what they're planning to do. So we should probably be slightly further ahead of that, shouldn't we?
Well, I think I'll ask Michael, just because Michael has been engaged with the Scottish and the Welsh position, and I think when Michael said that the arrangements being taken forward by the business and the Innovation and Skills Department in England is different from, so it's not the rest of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland doing something different from the rest of the United Kingdom. It's England deciding how they're going to use the levy for the purposes of developing skills in England. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have been liaising both with BIS and with each other in terms of the developments, and I'll ask Michael shortly just to cover where that has got to in terms of the progress. And indeed, maybe just the point that you raised in terms of the distinction between what they're planning for England and what is being planned for the other countries. On the amounts, that is still subject to discussion between the Department of Finance and the Treasury. So our understanding is, clearly because they'll be collected through the revenue, which Treasury will be liaising with in terms of the amounts they're collecting from each of the countries. So we are liaising with the Department of Finance here, but they're engaged on how that's actually being calculated. In terms of getting the amount back, well, our understanding again is that will be a decision for the executive overall. It's not in terms of their budget allocations and priorities. So we'll obviously be liaising with the Department of Finance on the implications of the levy and on the amounts that would be needed for the implementation of the apprenticeship strategy work that we've been taking forward. But the actual decisions on how much will come back for skills and apprenticeships will be an executive decision, because I don't think it's going to be hypothecated by the UK government into this. It'll be left very much to the local administrations to work out how much they want to resource those areas of activity. So that's our current understanding in terms of both the amount that will be raised, subject to discussions with the Treasury and the Finance, and the amounts that will be returned. Again, we have no clarity on how that will be come across, other than it will be left to the local administration to decide how to do it.
As you would appreciate, Eugene, of course, that's one of the major concerns of the business community. That money will just not go to what it's designed to do.
Yes.
And maybe, Mr. Chair, we could take a view on that as we go forward, to keep a careful eye on where this money is going to, and if it is actually going into skills.
We heard those remarks from businesses at the CBI event last week. So yes, we're aware of the the concern that Northern Ireland should get back for skills and apprenticeships the amount it puts in. But those are decisions I think for the executive in terms of how that money is used, and the amounts involved are still the subject of discussion with the Treasury itself. Michael, maybe just touch on the issues you raised around the Scottish position and other parts of the United Kingdom, and what Northern Ireland's proposals are in terms of how we're implementing the strategy.
Thanks, Eugene. I would also want to say that we've been engaged with the business community since we knew that this was going to be proposed by the Chancellor. So we've been engaged throughout. Their level of interest has increased dramatically as we come closer. But before Christmas, well before Christmas, we were engaged with them, but it wasn't really, there didn't seem to be a great deal of awareness. So we continue to work with the business community.
A lot of awareness now, yeah.
In terms of why there's a lot of similarities between apprenticeships in England and throughout the other devolved administrations, but there are regional economies and there are differences in what we believe are right for the apprenticeship strategy here in Northern Ireland. We have about 5 components that we believe are the right thing for an apprenticeship. It should start at level 3, which is equivalent to A level, and go up to level 8, which would be a PhD level. It should be for a new employee or a new job role. It should be at least 2 years training to be robust, and it should meet as a nationally recognised standard, but also have a more complementary on-the-job and off-the-job training. And there is that very strong element of progression. In England, they're prepared to accept something different, and the Chancellor has said their focus is on the 3 million apprentices in the space of this Parliament, and they're using the levy to raise the number of apprentices in that way. Their system, they're allowing a lower level, level 2, that begins at level 2 and goes to level 7. They're allowing, and just critically, they're allowing an existing employee to be considered an apprentice. They say the training should be at least 1 year and perhaps only 20% off the job training. So when we look at it, it looks like it could be used, it could be taken by employers as an opportunity to upskill, but call them apprentices. Whereas we believe, and the other devolved administrations, our policies are that the apprenticeship is really there for a young person going into a new job or someone going for a new job role, and then having the opportunity to progress, to meet the employer's needs, to meet the individual's needs, and hopefully to improve the economy and skills base overall.
I'll just interject one other thing. I think the apprenticeships are key to the future growth of our economy, and actually be able to upskill our people. And one of the things I would encourage the department, and again through the chair, I would like us as an administration to push the message that sort of apprenticeships is not a second-class route. It's actually equally as valued, and we do need to invest in that to make that happen and make that happen well. But again, it's the concern that with the apprenticeship levy coming in, there could be an opportunity to do this, but business is obviously concerned that it'll get frittered away onto other activities. But thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed for your answer.
Okay, Gordon.
Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Welcome, everyone, and good to see you again, Eugene. We are taking questions on the old levy issues. A number of us have been on the committee take it you are open to questions on those issues as well. You did mention...
I'm open to questions, whether I can answer them or not.
Oh, you will. Tourism strategy. What would you expect from the new tourism strategy that you've mentioned? I welcome the fact that you involve different stakeholders, and I think the council and so on have been involved in that.
Yeah, yes. We had a recommendation from the review of the Northern Ireland Tourist Board that there should be a new strategy. And there's events held earlier this year to get ideas and views on what that strategy should consist of. There's been there's good engagement with Tourism Ireland and Tourism Northern Ireland in terms of how that will be taken forward. And there's some analysis underway at the moment, so we want to have the analysis to underpin, what the proposed key components of that strategy will be. In terms of the detail, I'm going to ask Mike to come in on that, because
Mike has been with us before.
Yeah, Mike is steeped in this stuff.
Also, just on that, Mike, you maybe mentioned about Invest NI, working with Tourism NI, which I understand is a new proposal or something we're moving towards.
Thanks, Mr. Dunn, for the question. To take that first, people might be aware that Tourism NI have just actually physically relocated, so their offices are now in the same building as Invest NI, and that was done, very, very purposefully to try and build the relationships between those two organisations that are already strong, but we think can be stronger. And indeed, some of the tourism activities are performed by Invest NI. And indeed, this new department that we find ourselves in now, it's great. Like, I'm already seeing lots of work and connections with colleagues from the skills side coming into tourism and making the connections there, because there's real opportunities in this sector, and we see this as an export sector. Tourism is about exports, because we've people from outside here coming here spending their money. That in effect is an export, and we see real potential for the industry when we compare it to how the industry is performing in England, Scotland, Wales, the rest of Ireland. It's underperforming, so there's real capacity here. It also has the opportunity to provide jobs throughout the province, not just in Belfast, and that makes it very, very attractive.
That would be welcome, yeah.
And it also provides the opportunity to provide jobs at lots of different levels, entrance levels, but also higher levels as well. So it's a really attractive industry for us to push. There's a real open door for us to push, and we think we can do good things here. One of the key messages of the strategy that we're working on is to see this as a strategy for us all. This is not our strategy. We don't want to own this strategy. We want this to be a strategy for all of government, all of industry, local government as well, because tourism is one of those interesting industries that sort of transcends lots of borders. And that's what makes it really, really interesting. Local government colleagues have a huge role to play. Colleagues working in the field of agriculture and rural communities, huge role to play. The industry itself, still a young industry, still an industry that is developing, an industry that is growing, and we really want them to step up to the plate. And part of it is about how we can encourage, support, help them to step up to the plate and really drive the industry forward. And nothing's agreed yet. We're still at that stage. We've been doing lots of talking to people, and again trying to bring people along with us on a journey and listening and taking on board what people's thoughts are. But we think we could maybe get a £1 billion export industry by 2025. That's the sort of ambition that we have for the industry, and an export-led industry. And we're trying to talk in those sort of economic terms about it, because too long our sense has been it's been at the margins. I want to put it right in the centre of the Northern Ireland economy. It's a business.
May I interject? I would fully support that. there is a great opportunity, and I would actually say your billion is probably under-ambitious, because I think we can do much more. Because throughout the Northern Ireland hospitality sector, through the tourism sector, and having spent a lot of time previously working with Tourism Ireland, there's a lot we can be doing. And actually putting it together with Invest and making that a key thing is an excellent idea. And again, we may be in opposition, but we do support things that are really good ideas, and that's a good idea, so let's push it and get going.
Okay, folks, bear in mind, we've a second brief is in 5 minutes, and we've more questions to go through.
Just to add to what Mike said, we do see it as a key contributor to the economic strategy that's being refocused that I mentioned earlier. So there will be joins between the economic contribution of tourism and the economic strategy. That will,
Absolutely.
and our work on the tourism strategy will be developed in line with the economic strategy, and indeed, once the economic strategy is completed, we would expect that the tourism strategy then could be finalised. Obviously, all subject to the views of the minister in terms of what his views are on the contents of his strategy for tourism. But that's our planning horizon. That the economic strategy work will proceed in the next few months, and the tourism strategy analysis is currently underway. But that will fit in with the final refocused economic strategy once it's approved by the executive.
Okay. Well, just the other last point is on Invest NI itself, the need to keep the focus on 2018 incorporation tax and so on, the opportunities that are there, and, with the preparation work is vital. So what initiatives are taking place in relation to that? And
But can I just say, Gordon, that perhaps the next briefing might be better placed to talk directly to the Invest stuff.
Okay.
Would that be the case? No? That these guys have? I thought you'd invest NI policy in underneath yours, Chris.
I'm happy to agree with you.
Fair enough. I'm glad the silo's been ripped down.
No, there is work we'll be doing with Invest on how best to, and the skills agenda is very important for that, and in terms of what are they going to be the right skills going forward in terms of supporting the corporation tax changes. So there's linkages already being made across the skills, Invest, and other policy areas within the department, and it will be a high priority for us going forward. So there's probably a lot of detail going on, but for the purposes of this, we are making those linkages, and we do recognise the importance that skills will play in the corporation tax, and the important work that Invest will be doing in terms of promoting corporation tax for inward investment.
Dan, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Chair.
Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Just in terms of your opening concerns about construction at SRC, we should remind ourselves that the world's best plumber was an apprentice at SRC up until last year, so that's some good news in that respect. Just a couple of points and 2 or 3 questions. Also, just on the issue of capital for Beverley, it's worth pointing out that there is a sum allocated under TBUC in relation to Craigavon, which doesn't cover the entirety of the cost of that, but there is at least a commitment of sorts ahead of the budget in relation to at least one of the capital projects. And just picking up from Mervyn's concerns around the entitlement framework, is there active consideration be given within the department to working with the Department of Education around a 14 to 19 strategy or 14 to 19 statement? It's something that's been out there is on the to-do list for quite some time, but never quite go over the line. I know we tried a couple of times in the past 5 years, but it'd be certainly worth the department considering that in conjunction with your counterparts in education. In terms of the apprenticeship levy issue, particularly for Eugene and Michael, is it fair to say that the department will be seeking to try to get the money coming across as the Barnett consequential in Northern Ireland ring-fenced for skills? And the trick that we have to manage is to say that what's raised in England for what they term as apprenticeships will be used in Northern Ireland for apprenticeships under our model, youth training under our model, and other forms of in-work support, and being very clear to employers through guidance as to what is eligible in terms of that money. But at the same time, avoiding a situation where people assume that the proceeds of the apprenticeship levy will cover the entirety of the skills engagement, because it won't. There's much more to it than that. And it's worth stressing as well that the model we have in Northern Ireland on apprenticeships is very much based around quality, whereas there's real concerns have been expressed, including by businesses and UK Commission on Skills, around the dumbing down of apprenticeships in England around a target. And our model is very much more inspired by Germany and Switzerland. And finally, just a question for Mike. In relation to the business interaction, one of the main advantages of the new department is bringing together a lot of the business engagement. And to what extent you're taking forward work to consolidate the different business interactions? Obviously, the FEs, colleges themselves, have direct, through skills focus, direct engagement with business. You have Invest, you have tourism, you have the careers engagement apprenticeships. How's all that working at this stage?
Well, at this stage, it's very much trying to scope exactly what the improvements that we can make should be. The department really came together formally on the 9th of May, and we've been, but leading up to that, we were clearly talking to our stakeholders, both our arm's length bodies and the business community and others, just around what their expectations in that the department should be. As I said, we want to engage with those organisations and stakeholders in the coming months, because that's going to be important, to inform how we do things better. And in my opening remarks, I said that was very much something. Now that we're all within the one department, we see opportunities for doing so. Businesses see opportunities for doing so, but we want to get their views on how we best do that, because we know. And one of the things that the business representatives that we met a few months ago said, there are good things already in place, so you don't want to impact negatively on things that are working well, but there is scope now to bring some of the issues that you've outlined together, and that will be the role that we'll be taking forward. Formally, we've been together 4 weeks. We are scoping what we need to do. There's a lot of work that was ongoing in the two previous departments. That work is continuing, but we want to make sure that in setting the direction and for forthcoming work, we're taking into account the views of our key stakeholders as to how best to develop the agenda. So, I expect the committee will be asking us in the coming months how we're doing that, but that's where we currently are. The amount on the actual levy and the funding, I'm still waiting for confirmation of exactly how that funding is going to be determined by Treasury. I haven't, as I say, we're not dealing directly with Treasury, and that is through the Finance Department. I do understand that it's not been passed to Northern Ireland as a ring-fenced amount, so clearly we need to identify what the financial needs are as far as this department is concerned, and that's an engagement we think for the budget process. But that's, unless Michael's going to need more updates than that, but that's that's the current position as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, that's just the same.
Maybe just to come in again, Barry asked specifically on my area. Organisational structures and maps and of who's where are all jolly good, but it does come down to human beings and people to make things and make the connections work. As Eugene said, it's still early days, but I've been hugely impressed in the division and the section that I have, which does bring together people from the two old departments. I've been impressed by the enthusiasm, and people are up for this. You know, just to be speaking that sort of language, people are up for it, and people are seeing the connections, and you know, at times, you know, just the small conversations over the cup of coffee in the margins are where the connections are getting made. So, you know, I'm very positive about the potential. We had previously good working relationships, but I can see this developing deeper, because it is down to human beings and individuals, and when we're all together, you know, that just breaks those boundaries down so easily.
Okay. Alan?
Thanks, Chair. It's just a question really to seek a little bit of reassurance. In terms of the corporation tax, we're told that it is going to create a vast number of new jobs, and obviously we can anticipate that the construction industry, there will be opportunities there for new jobs. We're also told that investors that come into Northern Ireland that will be attracted by the new corporation tax, they'll also be attracted by the availability of trained and a skilled workforce. So I'm just wondering, excuse me, do we have an informed sort of process in place to anticipate what workplace skills might be required by these new investors? And is there any danger that we could end up actually creating a surplus of trained people in some sectors?
There's a piece of analysis called Skills Barometer that it attempts to anticipate what the skills gaps will be in the coming years, and it looks at sectors, it looks at current provision, and it looks at anticipated demand, and it identifies what the likely gaps would be, and that is information clearly of relevance to schools. It's of relevance to parents in terms of what their children subjects they choose to take. It's relevant to businesses, and it's clearly relevant to the training and education providers as to what are the likely anticipated gaps going forward. So that analysis, I think, was completed late last year.
That's right, it was published late last year.
I think a challenge for us will be to use that analysis to inform the discussions that we have with Invest and the FE colleges and other providers as to you know, what are the skills that this economy is going to need in the future. So it's quite a detailed analysis. It's and there's a lot of work now necessary to interpret and use that analysis to inform the very issues they raise about, you know, over provision in some areas, under provision in others. What information do we need to share with the schools and with the you know, the wider community in terms of what are the likely skills that are going to be needed for the future, and that work is ongoing at present. But yeah, it's central to that that analysis that was produced late last year.
In terms of the new jobs that corporation tax may bring to Northern Ireland, do you feel that there will be a surge of new jobs, or will it be something that will evolve over a number of years with the attraction of the corporation tax?
The only analysis I have is the, you know, the work that was done in anticipating sort of the overall number of jobs that would be created net over the next, you know, 15 or so years. I don't have details as to what that profile would look like. So, you know, and I think that will depend very much on other factors as well as, you know, the work that we do to market corporation tax to show that the benefits of coming to Northern Ireland and getting the interest of the business sectors in terms of coming here. So in terms of profile, I don't have information on that. As yet.
Maybe just from a practical perspective, we know that it takes companies, when they decide to come to Northern Ireland, when they decide to locate here, there is a period of time where they do ramp up. And that's why we put in programmes like Assured Skills to really work with the company so that we can directly provide the training and the skills that they need as they ramp the number of jobs up. So it'll be a gradual process.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation. I mean, it's a quick dip into a substantial section of the department. There are a couple of things I think we will want to would ask for the action plan between yourselves and DE in terms of encouraging apprenticeships. I would like to see that.
The careers strategy action plan between ourselves and DE.
Yeah, you talked in the start about the liaison with the Department of Education. And to encourage people through careers advice and then through your own working them into apprenticeships. It seems to be a bit of a blockage at the moment, certainly particularly in relation to construction trades and apprenticeships there. So see that we will want to return, I think, to the apprenticeship levy issue soon enough, whenever there's some further development in relation to it. And my own probably the tourism strategy as well as it develops. Would like to get another briefing on that. And my own misreading of your organisational chart, I am interested in seeing how the development of the economic policy then is reflected into Invest NI rather than through the department into Invest NI. But we'll come back to that at a later date. They're all substantial areas in their own right. But so this was a quick skip through some of them. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to agenda item 5. Further briefing. It's at page 18 on your acts. Is it relevant for this item? There is a copy of some correspondence. Teachers have the Ulster Farmers Union in relation to need. This is in relation to the renewables obligation and their views on what options should be taken in terms of the closure of that. There's a copy of a supplementary consultation the 30th of September 2015 on the renewables obligation closure consultation to onshore wind that was issued in March 2016. And that's, if you like, for background information, people want to ask questions in a particular area. It's probably an area that we will come back to in its own right in terms of that renewables, but by all means, as with the last briefing, it's an area that start to explore some of these issues, or an opportunity to start to explore some of these issues. But there are substantial chunks of business here for the department in each area that we would probably want to come back to individually and further. So we have Chris Stewart, who's the Deputy Secretary. June Ingram is the Director of Energy, Telecoms, Minerals and Petroleum. Jackie Kerr, Director of Business and Employment Regulation, and Alison Clydesdale, Director of Energy Renewables for the department. So I presume, Chris, you're leading off. If you make some opening statement, and then we'll allow members to come in with questions.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Very grateful, like our colleagues, for this opportunity to engage early with the committee on this, the third of the 4 groups within the new department. What I'd like to do, Chair, is give you a brief outline of what the group covers, and then set out some of the key challenges that we see facing us in this Assembly mandate. As you'll see from the makeup of most of my senior team who I have with me this morning, and the title of the group, it's a very diverse group in terms of what we cover. Broadly, there are 3 groups of businesses or activities within it, and those focus on, firstly, on infrastructure, and that includes energy, telecoms, minerals and petroleum. Within that, members will be aware that the previous DETI committee spent a lot of time, had a lot of focus on renewables. That continues to present us with many challenges. So as part of the reorganisation, that now is a separate business area within the group headed by Alison. The second of the 2 groups of business focuses on rights and regulations, and that's both with a focus on consumers through things like the Trading Standards Service, and also on employers and employees with a focus on employment law and the Insolvency Service, which is within the group. and also on business deregulation, taking forward the action plan from the review of red tape that was completed under the previous Assembly mandate. And third, and definitely not least, our group has the central services within the department, HR and corporate services, sometimes overlooked, but a very important part of the group, very important part of the department, ensuring that we're effective in terms of what we do. We also have oversight and liaison with a number of arm's-length bodies, not as many as Eugene's group, but we have a focus on the Consumer Council, on the Health and Safety Executive and the Labour Relations Agency, and we also have the interface with the employment tribunals and fair employment tribunals and industrial tribunals. So a very diverse group, Chair. We include everything from the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland, surveying abandoned mines, right through the Directors' Disqualification Unit, removing people from the role as directors. The thing that joins all of that together, the thread that combines us, I think, is that our core purpose is enabling the economy. And I think that is the answer to the first point that you put to Eugene. How do we ensure that it all has a common purpose within the department? All of those diverse activities all need to be viewed through the lens of what can we do to enable the economy to grow in Northern Ireland. In terms of challenges and key issues, I won't attempt to cover everything that's on our to-do list. There simply wouldn't be time today. And I don't think it'll surprise members if I talk mainly about energy and telecoms, particularly broadband. That's not to downplay the challenges in areas such as employment law or petroleum licensing, which is much in the news at the moment. But I think perhaps the most difficult and immediate challenges are in the areas of energy and telecoms. If I could start with energy. And the starting point in energy is almost always what we call the electricity trilemma. Three strategic challenges that we face on security of supply, ensuring that we have adequate generation, reliability and affordable infrastructure investment. On sustainability, with a focus on how fast to decarbonise our generation. And on cost, of course, balancing domestic fuel poverty and business competitiveness. All three of those are interlinked. Each have their challenges, but you can't intervene in one without affecting the other two, all strongly interlinked. We look first at security of supply. The context there is that over the next few years, our remaining coal-fired generation capacity will reduce and reach zero in a few years, and that's in response to the Industrial Emissions Directive. So we need to ensure within that context that we have an adequate safety margin of generating capacity over demand. And there are two very important measures that will secure that. First is the new All-Ireland electricity market, ISEM, which will come into being from October 2017. And that will ensure that we have the right entry and exit signals in the market for generators, so that older, less efficient plant will exit or be used less often. And investment will take place in new and more efficient capacity to ensure that we have that generation safety margin. Along with that, and extremely important, is the proposed second north-south interconnector. I can't overemphasise the importance of that. That is essential so that all of the capacity on the island, be it conventional or renewable, can be used efficiently and effectively, and that we have the security of supply that our economy is looking for. On sustainability, under existing policies on the previous mandate, we've achieved renewable electricity consumption of some 25%. That's against a target of 40% by 2020. And in relation to renewable heat, of around 6% against a target of 10%. Members will know that both of the former policy interventions, the renewables obligation, NIRO in electricity, and the renewable heat incentive are either ended or coming to an end. So I think the challenges now as we move forward are finding new and affordable measures to continue to make progress towards the Executive's target, assuming that the Executive retains the existing targets. Members, I think, will be particularly aware that there's a very sharp affordability challenge around renewable heat, because we have a great deal of expenditure already committed for the next 20 years under the old renewable heat incentive policy. So the challenge there is to find a new way forward, to continue to make that progress, but recognising that because of the legacy of the previous policy, we've got a very significant affordability challenge. Last but not least, of course, is cost. And there we have the twin challenges of keeping energy costs as low as possible by balancing the needs of domestic consumers, given the very high incidence of fuel poverty here, and the need to facilitate economic growth and ensure that our economy and the industries within it are competitive. There are particular challenges there in finding an effective policy intervention. Firstly, we have to recognise that there's a relatively small proportion of electricity bills that government can influence directly. The largest component of a bill is and always will be wholesale energy costs. Our room for manoeuvre is also limited because there is an independently regulated market governed by an extensive body of European legislation. And it's also the case that many of the potential changes that government could make tend to be zero-sum in nature. That is, if we transfer some costs away from one group of consumers, then they'll have to be picked up by another group of consumers. All of those issues and more were addressed in a recent report submitted to the Department from Energy and Manufacturing Advisory Group, which gave us a series of recommendations which are under very careful consideration at the moment, and I know the Minister intends to bring forward a response to that report in the coming months. We also have, I think, a significant challenge in terms of affordable investment in the electricity grid. Almost every issue that we come across in electricity, be it cost, be it connections, be it renewables, leads back to having an effective grid which can support that. And the challenge of making sure that we can invest and invest efficiently and affordably is one that we face going forward. I've talked mainly about electricity, but I should briefly mention gas. Members will be aware of two very important, significant projects underway at the moment, Gas to the West project and Gas to East Down, and those will connect respectively some 40,000 and 27,000 additional customers to the gas network. Linking all of those things together in both gas and electricity is the need for a coherent strategy. The current strategy, the Strategic Energy Framework, runs to 2020 and it is currently being refreshed. We expect to launch consultation on that in the coming months. We are also, subject to the Minister's decision, planning to bring forward a much longer-term energy strategy running to 2030. That's very much in response to what economic stakeholders have told us is needed. And at that, I think, Chair, again, going back to your first point, that needs to be linked to and stem from very clearly the refreshed economic strategy and the PFG. An energy strategy needs to be a key enabler for our economic strategy. In terms of telecoms, I think it's already clear, only a few weeks into the new mandate, that's the item which is turning up most frequently in the Minister's postbag. And a number of members of the Assembly have already tabled questions on it. I think it illustrates the importance of broadband and mobile telephony, both as economic enablers, but also as something, I think, increasingly regarded by consumers, domestic and non-domestic, as a utility, something people should have a right to expect. Again, the context there is somewhat challenging for us. These are fully privatised industries. They're independently regulated by Ofcom, and this is actually an area which is not devolved. It's a reserved matter. So overall policy is set by DCMS. That's not an excuse for us to wash our hands on it. Of course, we can't. We have some limited powers to intervene, but only to correct market failure. The challenge, I think, in this area has been set out for us in the draft programme for government, and that is to improve the proportionate premises with access to broadband at download speeds of 30 megabits per second or better. Assuming that remains in the final programme for government, then our challenge is to develop an affordable action plan to deliver a target improvement to shift that dial significantly. We don't have figures yet, Chair, as to what the benefit of that would be or what it would cost, but we do know from experience of our previous interventions that the costs are likely to be significant. For example, the current Superfast Broadband Improvement Project involves an investment of some £14 million with the aim of bringing improved connection speeds to 39,000 premises. Affordability will be a challenge going forward. To put it candidly, the low-hanging fruit has already been taken in this area, and if we're going to see significant benefit, I think particularly to rural communities, then that will involve significant investment. Looking just very briefly at business regulation, under the last mandate, the Executive endorsed a Better Regulation Action Plan. That's something that, subject to securing the necessary resources, we will be taking forward within our group. And that's cross-cutting. It's not only all areas of this department, but all departments, all regulators, local government as well. It's getting that message out and action on foot of it right across government, that it is our shared responsibility to do all that we can to grow the economy, because it's the economy, particularly through the changes in corporation tax, that will deliver the revenue that we are all looking for to improve public services. And last but not least, as I say, human resources and corporate services within the department. Our department has a key role in developing and delivering aspects of the programme for government, and that's against the background where we've just been through the biggest organisational change in many years, and we've seen a reduction in capacity across the civil service overall of some 17% in the last 2 years. So our group is responsible for ensuring that we have corporate services within the department to equip colleagues to take forward our new role, to ensure that we're a modern, fit-for-purpose organisation, and that our staff are equipped and developed to deliver the success in taking forward those challenges that I've outlined. Chair, it's a very quick canter over a very broad set of challenges. Happy to expand on any of those with colleagues or take members' questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just a couple of questions myself. In relation to energy, and we did go through the issue with the renewables at the tail end of the last mandate. There are two issues there. One is what options that you're going to take in terms of closing down the wind scheme, and then secondly, the executive had the targets of 40%. I presume part of that is dictated by EU requirements in terms of renewable energy and general requirements that the government will have as well. So working on the assumption that the targets are going to continue to be there for renewable energy, what new ideas are coming forward in terms of replacement? It's very regrettable that the heat energy scheme has left us with a burden, which means that it's going to be very difficult to resource that, but nonetheless, both in terms of meeting targets and also the industry that was involved in that, and ensure that it can continue to grow, and the businesses that were involved in that, and you say your primary function is supporting the economy, so it wasn't just about meeting the targets, it's also about supporting the economy. Also in relation to telecoms, and you're correctly identified, that is a very significant issue for all of us, and I accept that there are private companies involved in this, but the department is making interventions through financial support to these private companies. Is there a sense now that you maybe have an opportunity to take stock and develop going forward that you are getting full value for your intervention, not only yours, but the old Department of Agriculture was supporting particular interventions in rural areas? Are you getting full value for that? Are the companies taking this and fulfilling their own schedules, or are they doing it in accordance with, essentially the Department of the Economy, and if DAERA continue to be involved in this, are paying the piper in a certain respect in this, so they should be calling the tune in terms of the outputs that they want. Is that as effective as it should be? And if we do, and I presume there will be a strong sense among members, because as you say, it is a big issue for individual MLAs, and I'm sure it's a big issue for the departments involved, then is there a sense of trying to get a better return from any further interventions in terms of financial support to private companies to provide, particularly in the rural, as you said, the low-hanging fruit is already gone. Although there are still gaps in urban areas as well, but particularly in the rural areas where it's now become as essential a part of family life and family and rural business as roads, as water, as sewage. It's almost as an essential part of infrastructure as those others, which would be seen to be absolutely vital to sustaining life in rural communities. So are there thoughts in terms of getting a better return for the investment that you have made, and also in relation to renewables, what's the thinking in terms of going forward?
Chair, maybe with your permission, I could swap the order of those and address the telecoms issue first before coming back to renewables, and I'll begin and perhaps bring Alison in on that as well. In terms of telecoms, I think broadly we are satisfied in terms of the value for money of the projects. They were tightly drawn up, they're tightly policed. There is a significant input element, as you say, from agriculture. And that's to ensure that a proportion of the benefits are targeted upon rural communities. So I think we are getting value for money. But whilst it might not be the case that we're looking for a better return on future interventions, we always want to maximise it, of course, there may well be a case for looking for a different return. One of the consequences of that value for money question is that, and members will see this in their post bags every day, we ask British Telecom to deliver the maximum number of connections for each pound of investment that we make. Not surprisingly, that means that they will tend to prioritise those connections that are easiest to make, those that are closest to the cabinets where the runs of cable would be shortest. That means if you've got someone living particularly in a rural community, they might see the incredibly frustrating situation of knowing that there's a cabinet, knowing that that cabinet is being fibre enabled, but knowing that they happen to be a particular physical distance from that cabinet, which makes that last run of copper wire perhaps poor value for money in terms of that connection. So I think what I'm saying there is there's a tension between absolute value for money in terms of pounds and pence, and actually meeting the needs and expectations of people, particularly in rural communities, particularly those who are at a distance from some of the infrastructure. So there could be an argument for asking for a different return in the future, different targeting. And I think, again, going back to your initial point, we have not, under either of the current programmes, asked for a particular targeting on businesses. We had done under some previous interventions. There may be a case going forward, with this now being very explicitly in the Department for the Economy and saying there should be some degree of prioritisation for business, or some reflection of economic return as a criterion for setting the priorities for future interventions. None of the detail of that is worked out yet. I think we also need to see what is going to happen nationally in terms of the universal service obligation. To give everyone the entitlement of connection speeds of 10 megabits per second or better. In responding to the consultation on that previous department, the Minister's view was that that was necessary but not sufficient. It really doesn't take us very far. I think particularly if you look at that in terms of an economic enabler, and you see that the target in our nearest economic competitor, Ireland, is 30 megabits per second. That's no coincidence. I think that is the figure that's been outlined in the draft programme for government. Setting a target of 10, I think really viewed through an economic lens, would not be sufficient. So I think to sum all of that up, I think we are satisfied that we're getting value for money. But there's always, I think, a need to focus that on any interventions. The technology changes. I think there is a case for saying in shaping any new interventions, we might look for a different return on the investment that we have so far. If I could come back then to renewables, with the existing policies, interventions coming to an end, yes, the targets are still there, assuming that the executive doesn't decide to change them. Starting nationally, the 40% target isn't a binding national one. The target on the UK as a member state is 15% across heat, electricity and transport. The executive translated that into the particular targets for renewable heat and renewable electricity. You're right, Chair, in saying I think almost certainly one of the first things that the Minister will be asking the committee to consider will be proposals to close the remaining elements of the renewables obligation to small-scale wind. That consultation finished recently. The Minister is currently considering the results of that. I think fair to say, and I'm sure members will be hearing the same thing, is that from right across the industry we're getting very, very strong signals of the need for clarity, the need for certainty, the need for an early decision, the need to close it, frankly, as soon as possible. Thereafter, yes, the challenge still remains. What should a new intervention look like? Because the target is still there and the challenge is still there. Again, this is still all very early days, and subject to whatever direction the Minister gives us and priorities that he and his executive colleagues set for this. But the previous intervention, Narrow, was of a time and in a context where, in relation to the trilemma, the focus was very much on decarbonisation, maybe a bit less so on cost. That changed, certainly at a UK level, at the time of the last Westminster election, when the emphasis moved away from decarbonisation and was much more on cost. Now, I think if you're designing a policy intervention where you want, what you want to do is to secure the maximum number of megawatts of renewable energy, then you would design something like the Narrow. If your focus is much more on cost and much more on enabling the economy, then you might design something quite different. You might move away from a universal subsidy to generation. We might want to target particular technologies differently. We might want to target a particular scale. Some colleagues in the small-scale part of the industry might disagree with me on this, but I think it's an observable fact that large-scale is more efficient than small-scale in terms of what it delivers. So if your priority is on efficiency and on controlling costs, then you might want to target a particular scale more so than we have done in the past, where the Narrow is a very broadly based policy intervention. We might also, and this is something that the EMAG group looked at and I think focused upon, we might want to target those interventions that are very closely associated with economic benefit. So, for example, schemes like combined heat and power plants, which would allow our significant employers both to control their own energy costs as well as delivering decarbonisation benefits, might be something that in a new policy would be given more emphasis and more priority than has been the case up to now. And again, there is the issue of affordability. Prior to the Westminster election and under the previous Assembly mandate, the policy intention actually had been set out very clearly. It was that we would end the Narrow and join the UK-wide scheme known as electricity market reform for large scale, and for smaller scale we sought to join in arrangements known as a small scale feed-in tariff. On the latter, the small scale feed-in tariff, I'm afraid we were rebuffed by DEC, who don't wish Northern Ireland to join that. On electricity market reform, the Minister hasn't made a final decision yet, but that, if he were minded to join it, would lead to a very significant increase in costs. Consumers probably paying 3 times as much as they were paying under Narrow, with much less, perhaps no guaranteed benefit for Northern Ireland. I could explain the detail of that to members, but it's a consequence just of the design of the scheme. So the previous policy intention may not fit with Northern Ireland's needs. That option of just joining in with the UK-wide approach may be a difficult one for us. So that throws up challenges. Might we try and do something purely within Northern Ireland? That would allow us, of course, to target the particular technologies, scales, benefits that we think are most appropriate, but with a much, much smaller consumer base might be extremely expensive, perhaps unaffordable. We might consider looking at all-island options that would have the advantage of a larger consumer base, but still very much smaller than the UK. Would allow us to align renewables policy with the generation market. But again, our Irish colleagues are still at a relatively early stage in determining what their way forward is going to be on policy on this. So we don't yet know whether their priorities will line up with ours. Chair, sum all of that up, I think, by saying we're at a very early stage. There is thinking going on. I would assure you there is engagement going on, both with economic stakeholders as well as energy stakeholders, on what the options might be there. And we're engaging with the Minister to take his direction on what the priorities ought to be. Perhaps bring Alison in at this point. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Just maybe for your information in relation to the Narrow closure of the small-scale wind. You remember in the last mandate that the DEC Energy Bill was progressing through Westminster, and it has now actually reached royal assent, and so DEC do have their backstop powers, and they do have the powers to take action were we not to close. So those are now in place, which is a slightly different position to the previous mandate. And also just to say, in terms of any sort of sustainability and renewable policy going forward, we would also want to look at the impact of energy efficiency policies and the impact that they can make both at domestic and non-domestic levels. They can provide a useful contribution as well.
Okay, thank you. Just one other factor to bear in mind in considering the new policy is that there is an industry out there which is effectively being closed down, and the longer it takes to get some type of new policy in place, then there's a danger of losing those skills and the investment that was made in people in their businesses. So it is an additional factor to bear in mind when we're considering the timescale for bringing forward new ideas. We have Steve, Kiva, Sinead and then Tom in that order.
Chris, I feel you're hurt, having worked with government before and in 5 years had gone through 9 years of different energy policies in Whitehall. I know exactly how it feels. And Alison, good job, but it's going to get harder by the sound of it and so things going forward.
Yes.
But the first thing I need to sort of concentrate on is the particular issue about the grid and what's happening with the grid at the moment, and the fact that we need to have that 400 kVA line out in the west as part of the interconnector, so that even if we consider going for an all-island or even an all-island solution, we need to do that as well. My first question is, how are we getting on with planning? How are we getting on, particularly working with the Republic of Ireland, because they've got significant planning issues to do with the 400 kVA line as well? And what point are we getting to? And a time when we can actually say the interconnectors need to be up and functioning, because you've got very tight deadlines, October 2017. The other issue, of course, is that I've been sort of working closely with industry, and industry have been talking a lot about the issues with the Moyle interconnector. One of the issues we have, particularly working with the Moyle interconnector, is the large volume of renewables that's now going down the west coast of Scotland and into the sort of the wider UK market in that way as well. So that is probably another issue we need to be considering when it comes to think about where we're going about the overall all-islands market if we wish to do it as well. My other concern is in South Antrim we have some really good companies like Randox and British Belfast International Airport who have had real concerns with connection to the grid and support to the grid as well. I had the privilege of being at Lightsource, who were recently doing one of the major solar farms. And of course the reason why Lightsource decided to work very closely with Belfast International Airport was because they didn't have the problems of trying to connect to the grid. They could just connect to the airport. And I'm hearing quite a lot from sort of major companies in South Antrim, really good companies that are having huge problems with connecting with the grid and reliability of supply. Bearing in mind we've got an economic strategy that we need to sell Northern Ireland as a great place to come and do business. One of the major things that companies come and do when they look at a risk register is the security of supply and the price as well. And we're not doing very well on either. So my question is, what are we doing to make sure this is taken forward as a degree of urgency? And one of the things that we'll have a lot about, you'll hear a lot of companies talking about, is they don't care what the policy is, just have a policy and stick to it. And that certainty issue, I think, needs to be represented both by government and both to the stakeholders as well, so we know we're going to as well. So any thoughts about making sure that that was as well? There's a raft of stuff about broadband, and we will probably be doing committee meetings between now here and whenever about it as well. So I'll not concentrate on that. Well, my major concern is around this 400 kVA interconnector and interconnector position, so I would like your views on that.
Certainly. I mean, I think you've identified, I think, the most significant set of infrastructure challenges that we have on this. Let me start off with interconnection and then perhaps talk a little bit more generally about the grid. In terms of the North-South interconnector, it's in the planning system in Ireland and just about to re-enter the planning system in Northern Ireland. I think the hearing begins on the 21st of June. We are liaising very closely with our colleagues in the Dublin department on that. What we're hearing so far is that so far so good in terms of its progress through the Irish planning system. As you will know, there are concerns from stakeholders. Very strong representations have been made from some that it should be undergrounded rather than the proposed overground route. Our response to that, and we know that of our Dublin colleagues as well, is that is just not affordable. It would increase the cost around sixfold for that. But so far, so good. Now, it's at an earlier stage in terms of the Northern planning system. The hearing will start on the 21st, I think, just with a couple of days of a very technical focus before it gets into the more substantive consideration of the planning issues around it. But we'll be keeping a very close eye on that, and clearly as a department I think we would look to provide evidence to that inquiry to make sure that we underpin the economic importance and significance of that infrastructure development. So, I would reassure you that we see that as a very high priority issue. We will pay close attention to it, and we will be in constant communication with our colleagues in the Dublin department, and we will engage with the inquiry on it to try and secure the best outcome. In terms of the Moyle itself, interconnector itself is in better shape than it has been. The repairs of the cables have been successful, and it will be back to its full capacity in the very near future. But there is a significant factor in terms of the transmission network in Scotland, where some major work is required, which is going to reduce the capacity and utility of the Moyle, I think, for a significant period next year. That, unfortunately, is something that is out of our control, and it will be a constraint on the utility of the Moyle.
Just interject, maybe asking the Minister to interject, obviously, with the Scottish Government to put appropriate priority on that.
We could certainly put that to the Minister. We certainly, at official level, would want to make sure that our colleagues across the water recognise the importance to us of decisions that might be made around the GB transmission network and how that might affect us. In terms of the grid more generally, yes, we're very aware of the concerns that you've outlined that are coming forward from industry. I have to observe candidly that we see here some unintended consequences of renewables policy as it has played out up to now. At the risk of oversimplifying it, I mean, the design of the grid stems from the late 50s, early 60s. Not all of the infrastructure is that age, of course, it's renewed periodically. But it was designed essentially to transport electricity from a small number of conventional plants down increasingly finer wires to consumers. It was never designed to convey electricity in the other direction from renewable generators, so it requires considerable investment and strengthening in order to do that. The grid was already under, I think, significant strain even before some recent events around the closure of Narrow. We could provide it for the committee. NIE produced what they call the heat map, which shows very graphically the levels of congestion on the grid. Not surprisingly, the further west you go, that's where the wind is, the more congested it gets, really to the point where it's saturated. And that creates difficulties both for renewables projects seeking to get connected, but also increasingly for what are called load connections, just for industry trying to get secure supply that you've rightly outlined. That, I think, was compounded by the sort of last orders rush of applications that came in when it was announced that the Narrow was closing. Not surprisingly, a lot of renewables developers wanted to make sure that they got that guaranteed level of support before the Narrow came to an end. But unfortunately, the total potential demand there, I think it was some 1,500 megawatts. To connect it all would require deep reinforcement of the transmission part of the network. I'm not an engineer, and I usually describe this using a roads analogy, the motorways, as opposed to the A and B roads. It's not only the A and B roads that would need reinforced, but the motorways, the transmission part of the network. And that is why Northern Ireland Electricity Networks and SONI had to introduce a de facto moratorium on connections until recently to assess what could be done there, because it's very, very challenging. And I think, added to that, it isn't simply a case of the executive being able to say, even if it were able to, oh, well, this is very important, let's prioritise this for capital investment, we'll spend whatever it takes to improve the grid. This is something which is determined by a particular process run by the regulator. Current round of it is called RP6, where the regulator must decide how much can be spent by the commercial companies in investing in the electricity network. And that can be challenged, as it was under the last price determination mechanism, and if it's challenged, then it's determined by the Competition and Markets Authority. So government doesn't just have a free hand here in deciding how much to invest in the network. There is a recommendation within the EMAG report that over and above anything that the price determination mechanism might allow for, that government should look to invest some additional resource. That is being looked at. We have to look very carefully, not only at issues around affordability on that, but even to see whether it's actually legally possible for government to do that, even if they decide to priority.
Just a question for the Chair. I think for this committee, this is one of the most essential things we need to be looking at over the next sort of year, because there is so many interlinking issues to do with this, and also with economic development, and also looking out to the west as well. There's one of the requirements, we're looking for a greater spread of sort of employment opportunities. We're looking at corporation tax. And from what you're saying, and thank you very much indeed for your candidness, because that mirrors very much what I'm getting from the business community as well. We've got a significant problem here, and it's a problem that we can't no longer ignore. We need to work very closely with it. and I fully appreciate the independence of the regulator. However, we're looking at a situation now where the regulator, through various rules and regulations, may actually be hampering the future economic development of Northern Ireland, and we need to be careful that we're actually identifying these issues fairly early on and trying to make some progress on it. But thank you very much indeed for your candor, Chris. Thank you.
Absolutely right on the concerns. I mean, I'll hesitate and not try and speak for the regulator. No doubt the committee might want to hear from the regulator in due course. I have to say we have a very good relationship with the regulator. We work very closely together. It is an independent body. It doesn't take direction from us in any way. Nevertheless, the regulator is very mindful of wanting to work within the policy context that the minister sets. It is very mindful of the need to discharge their functions in a way that would contribute to that. I think you're absolutely right. Going forward, no matter how much is invested in the grid, whether it comes from consumers' bills or taxpayer funded through the executive, it isn't going to be as much as any of us would like. So we're still going to have, I think, an issue there of rationing grid capacity. So one of the things I think that we will want to look at, we'll want to engage on with the regulator, and we'll certainly want to engage on with SONIA and Northern Ireland Networks, is what rationing criteria, if I could put it as crudely as that, might be applied to that. But clearly, in the context of a Department for the Economy, I think we would want, maybe much more overtly than we have in the past, for some of those criteria to be economic benefit.
Yeah, and I feel with nervousness and concern when we're talking about the word with rationing. And I think maybe that is a concern we completely as a committee would sort of...
It'll probably come back to haunt me, but I think it is the appropriate term.
Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Kiva?
Steve has really touched on pretty much a lot of what I wanted to say, so I'm not going to repeat it, other than to maybe reinforce what he has said about the reliability of supply and issues that have been raised with me around, for example, along the north coast where we have the enterprise zone going to Coleraine, and the need for, capacity there for any potential investors that are coming to that, particularly in the IT sector. The other point I wanted to touch on was the Gas to the West project. It runs from Maydown west to Strabane, Cookstown, Dungannon. Is there any plans to link that back to Limavady, where the gas network is currently, to touch upon Greysteel and Ballykelly in between?
I don't think so, but I'll
to check.
just rather than give you an accurate, misleading answer, perhaps we could just double check that and come back to you. But I don't think so at this stage. On the security of supply, yes, absolutely. The only caveat I think I would put on that is, yes, I mean we do very clearly hear the concerns from industry on that. It's a strategic issue. I mean, we're not hearing about supply outages, the power being turned off. But yes, people who are planning to make significant investments, of course, do their research very, very carefully. They look at Sony's assessment of generation capacity and adequacy going forward. They see the challenge that the Industrial Emissions Directive presents us with from 2020 onwards, and they will say, well, before we're going to invest many millions of pounds or dollars, we want a level of assurance that there's going to be a security of supply sufficiency beyond 2020. And as I say, it's not that we're whistling in the dark and hoping that there's an answer to that. There is an answer to that. Two very important components, ICEM and the North-South interconnector. Those two things done right will give us security of supply, and I confidently assert that. But they have to be delivered, and there's a lot of work to be done on both of them.
Okay. Sinead?
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Chris and team.
Thank you.
Again, like Eva, you've answered a lot of what I was going to raise regarding the grid, and I've no doubt it will be probably one of the single biggest factors that we'll have to discuss around the table. But I will perhaps just throw a thought out when we're discussing broadband. And the Chair rightly pointed out that it's not just rural areas, there are little pockets of urban areas that still waiting for really reliable, good source broadband. What did occur to me, and I suppose it was amplified again when you referred to the grid and the single wire that historically was for transmission of electricity one way. And I'm conscious of the amount of work in rolling out over really in rural areas when we are out there are we future-proofing the work as best we can? I appreciate that's a challenge. You know, it's okay with hindsight looking back and think, wouldn't it have been great had those wires run both ways? But are we future-proofing any broadband services that we are physically going out to huge rural areas, hopefully to roll out over time? And I don't know if that's been considered or if it's just worth throwing out there at this stage.
It's a very fair point, and maybe with your permission and the Chair's, I could perhaps come back to you with a more detailed answer on that. The short answer is yes. I mean, in the projects, the consideration has been given, but I'd want to get back to you on the detail on it. We wouldn't want to make the very significant investments of public and indeed private money that have been made over the next few years if it was only going to last us for a few years. So the investment that is being made in fibre technology certainly is intended to bring a lasting benefit in terms of our capability. But again, you're right in terms of the disadvantage that we might have compared with some other countries that are starting with something near to a clean sheet of paper in terms of putting a network down. We're trying to build and develop a network that is many, many years old and was built and designed before broadband and the internet were even thought of, and now has to fulfil a very, very different purpose. But your point is a fair one. We certainly would aim to build into any intervention project the need for future-proofing, the need to make sure that we get value for the taxpayers' money and the investment that we make.
Sorry, if you don't mind, as much as future-proofing, it is that rural proofing that I suppose that low-lying fruit, as you refer to it, is easier to revisit at a later time, whereas the rural area is not. So it's as much a rural proof as it is, yes, future-proofing that. Should it be that bit more expensive, rural areas may be worthy of that earlier investment. That's my thought.
I think that's a very fair point. Again, I think it would be remiss of me if I weren't to say to you candidly, in terms of the two most recent projects, the Broadband Improvement Project and the Superfast Broadband Project, as with any investment project, they're subject to rigorous appraisal and test for value for money, which thankfully they both passed and they're being rolled out. But they didn't pass by much, to put it frankly. They're almost at the limit of what would have been considered sufficient value for money there. So I think a lot will depend going forward on what the executive's priorities are, what the minister's priorities are. If you see broadband in terms of a commercial commodity which is purchased, then you look at value for money in a particular way. If you see it as something which is a key economic enabler, then you might look at it slightly differently. If you see it as something like a utility to which everyone ought to have a right to a particular standard, then you would look at it differently again. And the value for money equation would come out, I think, differently, depending on which lens you look through.
Yeah, thank you. Tom?
Yeah, and a number of the issues have been touched on, but first of all I want to welcome the guests to the West. It is something that I have businesses waiting for it to come to get connected into, and indeed a few businesses have been a lifesaver for them, and they have begun at this moment in time actually to increase to double the size of their business, which is a good news story for the West. And we'll look forward to that being completed and ready to hook up on. The other issue is broadband, that has been touched on, and it is a huge issue, and I'm sure the people in the department are probably sick of me writing to them about areas that I have within my own constituency.
Certainly not.
There is or very poor broadband cover, and while the upgrading of the cabinets has been a good thing, it has also been a double-edged sword in a sense where it has helped some people get faster speeds, and other people who were getting maybe 1.5 megabytes or so had reduced their speed. So it has been a double-edged sword in some of the rural areas. But has the department looked at using another method rather than the copper cable that is much maybe more cost effective to roll out?
Yes, we have, and I should have mentioned it earlier. You're right, and I know it must be incredibly frustrating for consumers, when they literally can see or drive past the cabinet that they know is fibre enabled, but that last run of copper wire to their house is too long for them to avail of the service. That is why we have now in place the satellite scheme. particularly for people living in locations where they just can't avail of a copper wire or fibre-based service. So there's a subsidy payment up to, I think it's £350, June, and there's a number of accredited providers who can offer that scheme. And I think it's an exciting and interesting development. It may not be the answer for everybody, but I think for those people who, just because of their location, it's unlikely in the short term that they're going to get a fixed wire solution. I think it offers a very interesting alternative, and one which we're certainly happy to support.
Well, can I just put another scenario to you? Someone living on one side of the road and they're getting their broadband, but someone living on the other side of the road who's in a different postcode area and they're not getting a broadband. Now that surely something could be done there to solve that problem, and you only what the road between the farmyards or the businesses or whatever it is. Rather than having a situation where here's somebody looking across at another person on the other side of the road, and one has it, the other hasn't got it.
Absolutely, and again, I'm sure members get this very frequently in your post bags. People will say, there's a cabinet outside my house, but I've been told that's not the one I'm connected to, and I can't get broadband from it. Incredibly frustrating. I think it goes back to what I said in response to one of the Chair's opening questions. Do we want a better return on investment, or do we want a different return on investment? Now, if we say to BT, we want you to get us the best value for money purely in terms of pounds and pence, that is, we want you to do the least expensive connections first, then that's the sort of pattern that you end up with. If we were to ask for a different outcome, if we were to say, no, there's a certain standard of broadband that we want everybody to be able to access, then you would come out with a different pattern. So the answer to your question is yes, I think it is possible to get what people might describe as a more rational outcome, perhaps at the expense of value for money in its purest sense. But if that's the policy direction that's set, then it's possible to do so. I think within limitations, I think there will always be people living in particularly challenging locations where it's maybe just a technical constraint on what a fixed line can do.
Okay, Gordon Dunforce, and then we'll take Gordon.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much again for coming in, and I think a lot of issues have been covered. Just on that, Chris, you are convinced that we have had value for money on broadband to date. Considering the number of issues that have been raised already, and all of us are aware of the areas that have, the weaknesses that there are throughout the whole country, and yet it's been multi-million-pound schemes really rolled out. They have been UK based, haven't they?
Yes.
They're UK based schemes and rolled out throughout the country. But still, it hasn't really been satisfactory, and yet you feel that we've had value for money. And I understand the issue. The low-hanging fruit is easy done, and there's a bigger return on it, obviously, for the installer. But it has left a lot of areas that haven't been addressed.
It has, and I think in answering yes to that question, I wouldn't want to sound blasé about those who are not getting the service that they're looking for, and that's why I hesitate to quote some figures, but I will quote them. If I look at what we currently have in terms of percentage of premises getting connection at a particular speed, 94% getting better than 2 megabits per second, 91% getting better than 5 megabits per second, 88% getting better than 10 megabits per second, and 77% getting greater than 30 megabits per second. On the one hand, that's a good figure. That's value for money in terms of what we've achieved. It's scant comfort to anybody in the 27% who can't get that.
Are there still some outside those percentages that haven't had it at all? That's of the ones that have been installed.
Yes. Now, I think in terms of people getting no access at all, I think that there's a good story to tell there. The percentage would be very small in terms of anybody with no access to broadband. But again, here what we see is the technology and the demands changing. Anybody who's trying to run a business, or I think anybody with teenage children, would say that what you need in terms of bandwidth has changed very significantly over the past 5 years. So, whilst the focus a few years ago might have been on 2 megabits per second, which would have been seen as very, very good, there are some now who would say, does that even qualify as broadband anymore? Is it good enough? 24 megabits per second certainly was the main focus of the last intervention project that we have. But the programme for government, I think, as I say, recognising that our nearest economic competitor has set a target of 30, then I think that's the starting point for us. We can't even sit back and be complacent about that. That might be good enough now. It won't be good enough in 5 to 10 years' time.
Okay, changing the subject completely then. Moving on to the small scale wind and the options that we have. I thought for a moment we were going to have to say them here today. And I see they were in front of us here and I was panicking for a while, but we've settled down. But the option one...
We'll spare you that for a while.
Option one looks like the strong option, really.
Yeah, there's 3 options in the consultation
Yeah.
paper, close in June, close in September, or revert to the original close in March 17. So all options were to close, really. It was just the differences were in the timescale.
Yeah. Okay. The big problem is that if we drag it on, there's likely to be an issue over the socialisation, which could affect all consumers.
That's right, and now that DEC do have their powers, they would have the powers to lay secondary legislation then to protect GB consumers from any costs that would be incurred should we not close. So DEC have those powers, and in order to exercise them, they would simply need to lay secondary legislation at Westminster.
I think it's just worth re-emphasising that members who are on the former DETI committee will recall this, not fondly, but it's a very significant potential penalty. If DEC invoke that legislation, then they will restrict the trading of what are known as ROCs, renewable obligation certificates, from Northern Ireland. That could have the effect of devaluing ROCs, not just ROCs from new projects for the most recent projects, but all ROCs in Northern Ireland, and that would affect every renewables project in every technology of every scale, and really would be a very, very draconian penalty. So, the differences between the options that Alison has referred to, in terms of the additional megawatts that we might be able to bring on stream. Now, if you're one of those project promoters, you might, of course, see that as very, very significant. But in terms of the overall benefit to Northern Ireland, relatively small in going for any of the later closure options. In terms of the disbenefit, potentially huge in terms of the penalty that DEC might apply.
Just on the NIE, are they open for connections or not?
NIE published just on the 31st of May there, they published their consultation response to their alternative connection process, and that seems to indicate that they will be issuing some offers in the period between July and September. The document indicates that they think there's about 20% remaining capacity of all of the connection applications that they have. So hopefully if some people did get offers in July and September, that might allow some more projects to proceed.
Okay. John, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair. Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. As a member for the East Antrim constituency, I always have an interest in energy generation. You'll know Ballylumford and Kilroot and the work that's going on there. Huge challenges, obviously, but an awful lot of investment recently as well, particularly in terms of energy storage, which is responding to the different way in which energy is generated and the effects that then has on plants such as Ballylumford and Kilroot. But in terms of the future, as we look forward and as you put together your energy strategy and the updated new SEF, could I just emphasise the importance of making sure that is a long-term strategy, because 2020 is tomorrow, really, in terms of energy generation and what those companies would have to do to put in place what's needed for the future. This takes a long time, and so the certainty that can come with having that long-term strategy and the SEF in place would be very, very helpful. So I just hope that if you want to make a comment on that would be helpful, but if you just keep that in mind, that we don't need a strategy till 2025 or even 2030, it should be beyond that. To give that certainty for the future.
That message came through very, very clearly in the early consultations on SEF, both from the energy industry but from industry more broadly. They were rightly saying, if they're going to make multi-million-pound investment decisions, then they need that long-term certainty, and we've certainly taken that message on board. Yes, you're quite right to point to interesting developments in East Antrim, the battery storage project at Kilroot, the compressed air storage project that Electric is taking forward, and the gas storage project there. I think all very interesting, potentially very significant projects. I think storage is something which has the potential to be very significant in the future. One of the things that we will be looking for assurance on from the regulator is that the design of the new market will send the right signals to providers in that. The importance of storage, I could maybe illustrate with a small anecdote. If members ever have occasion to look on the Sony website, you'll see that you can there get very good, practically real-time information on the generation mix in Northern Ireland. I happened to be looking at it over the course of one weekend. On a very windy Saturday, over 50% of our consumption was coming from wind. By the next day, Sunday, it had dropped to 5%, simply because the wind had dropped. At the moment, overall, our system isn't making best use of the renewable energy that is generated. There are constraints and curtailments, and that imposes a cost. Storage may be part of the answer to that. Interconnection, I think, will be a much more significant part of the answer. But storage will be part of that. So we're very interested to see how those particular projects progress and how the regulator will incentivise and see the way forward for that sort of technology in the future.
Okay. Members might find that interesting if they would like some information about it. Fantastic what's happening at Kilroot, the battery storage that they have in order to deal with the generation differences that happen whenever wind dies down. So it might be something that the committee would like to look at further.
Okay, fair enough. We'll get some information on that to share with people. Thank you very much. It obviously is a quick tip in. There are big issues clearly around energy, around telecoms in particular. But we'll get into more detailed briefings on each area as things develop. I assume we'll be expecting a recommendation from the Minister in relation to the narrow closure in the near future.
It's with him at the moment, Chair, but yes, as soon as he gives us the nod, we'll get it to you as quickly as we can.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we move on to item 6. There are no matters arising. So we'll go on to item 7. The clerks, let's see, SL1 on the Posted Workers Enforcement Employment Rights Regulations. The clerks memos on page 63 and the SL itself is at page 6 of the table pack. And the draft statutory rules at page 12 of the table pack for information. The rule will transpose the 2014 Posted Workers Enforcement Directive. A worker is posted when for a limited period of time the worker carries out work in a member state other than the state in which the worker normally works. The SR makes provision for a posted worker working in the construction sector to have a right to make a claim against their employer's contractor for the non-payment of wages up to the national minimum wage. Eligible individuals will be able to bring proceedings in an industrial tribunal and may be awarded compensation. Cross-border enforcement of financial administration penalties and/or fines, and an information gateway within the revenue and customs to allow for an exchange of information further to reasoned requests for information from competent authorities in other member states. So this is something that has gone through prior. The SR is subject to negative resolution and procedure before the Assembly. The Enforcement Directive must be transposed by the 18th of June. This is this committee's opportunity to consider the policy set out in the SL1. And it's not possible to amend this once the rule has been made and laid in the Assembly Business Office. So we have some officials who can speak to this. John McKeown is the Head of Employment Relations Policy and Legislation within the Department. Deirdre Walsh, Employment Relations Policy. And Jackie Kerr is back with us again as Director of Business and Employment Regulation. So it's just, I suppose, there's quite a degree of technical detail in this, and there also is the issue, I suppose, of the forthcoming referendum in terms of member states and workers moving across that. So perhaps just to give us some information in relation to this and how it sits and how it may sit beyond any possible change in status if that were to occur.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, or we appreciate your opportunity to come along and actually speak to you about this SL1 today. This was the earliest opportunity we had to actually present the SL1 to the committee. It was the actual regulations were laid in GB on the 27th of April, which you'll appreciate occurred during the pre-election period. And first opportunity we've had to present the proposals to the Minister and then to the committee has been now. So we're very grateful for you taking this issue today, and we appreciate it's quite a tight deadline that we're asking you to consider this within. The transposition deadline is the 18th of June. So it is a very, very tight deadline. If we miss that deadline, the risks hopefully are minimal because it will have been transposed on a UK-wide, or the GB aspect will have been implemented. But again, we'd appreciate the committee's consideration of this issue. So if you're content, it might be useful for you if I ask John just to give you a very brief summary of the key aspects of the SL1, just so you can get an understanding of an overview of it, and then any questions that you would have. Thank you.
Okay, Chair, thank you. I'm conscious you've had a long morning, so I'll scoot through this as quickly as possible. So the original directive, the Posting of Workers Directive, was adopted in 1996 and enforced since December 1999. And it's essentially a single market measure to ensure a level playing field when businesses or agencies post workers temporarily from one member state to another to provide services. That directive entitled posted workers to certain core employment rights available in the country they're posted to, including things like minimum rates of pay, maximum work periods and non-discrimination provisions. It applies to both workers posted from the UK to other member states, as well as to workers posted from other member states to the UK. So the Framework Directive defines a worker as posted when, for a limited period of time, the worker carries out their work in the territory of another member state. Posted workers aren't the same as migrant workers who, of their own accord, move between member states to seek work and gain employment there. So the original Framework Directive provides that both businesses and workers can take full advantage of the opportunities offered by the single market and supports the freedom to provide services across the EU, and thereby ensuring fair competition for businesses while at the same time ensuring protections for the rights of workers. So that was the original directive. And then in March 2012, the Commission brought forward proposals for this current enforcement directive. And that was as a result of concerns raised by some member states that the protections outlined in the original directive weren't being fully complied with. So as a result, the Commission proposed additional legislation, and that's what we're considering today, for improving monitoring of posting situations and just generally to improve compliance with the original directive. The Posted Workers Enforcement Directive was adopted in May 2014. The directive builds on mutual cooperation, information and enforcement requirements in the Framework Directive, and also introduces a requirement for subcontracting liability in the construction sector. The directive's purpose is to ensure that posted workers get the rights to which they're entitled, most notably the right to be paid, and that member states then operate an effective monitoring and compliance system. So the SL1 was really built around three key items, and that's making provision for posted workers in the construction sector to make a claim against their employer's contractor for non-payment of wages. Secondly, then, to enhance, if you like, cross-border enforcement of financial penalties and fines. And thirdly, then, to enhance and promote a greater exchange of information. You refer to it as the information gateway between member states and between competent authorities.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I suppose one question is the regulation here is slightly different from that in Britain. I was just wondering why that was. And I don't want us to get into open up the debate around Brexit, but there will be obviously implications if there's an exit from the European member states, and this regulation, I presume, won't apply, or does it become part of the negotiation process over the 2 years?
In the event of exit,
yeah.
it
I think
if we transpose by the 18th of June, which we hope we will, it'll be a transpose directive like any other employment directive, and I know there's been some speculation, but I'm not sure that anybody knows what's going to happen with the undoing of directives if we were to leave Europe.
Okay, fair enough. And the reason we have a slightly different version from Britain?
Yeah, there are three elements to that, Chair. One is there was a review clause, which is now a standard duty in secondary legislation, where regulatory provision is made, and that was built into the Small Business Enterprise and Employment Act. But we don't have such a standard review provision in Northern Ireland, and it wasn't a compliance issue in terms of the enforcement directive. So we didn't seek to introduce it, such a review provision at this time in Northern Ireland.
Okay.
The second one then was provision for a 2-year backstop on a claim to an employment tribunal. Now that came in GB in line with the deduction from wages limitation regulations 2014. So it was introduced as a result of case law presented by the Burr Scotland versus Fulton case around the decision of an employment appeal tribunal in around the autumn of 2014. So just prior to Christmas, 1 week exactly before Christmas 2014, the GB government introduced this legislation then and it created essentially a backstop of 2 years for claims to a tribunal for unlawful deduction of wages. Now we haven't created legislation in Northern Ireland for that backstop, so there's no intention to put that in place as a result of this particular transposition.
Okay.
And thirdly, then there's reference in the GB regulation to early conciliation, and while the recent Employment Act in Northern Ireland has provisions for early conciliation, they won't be commenced until April 2017. So we're not in a position yet to build in the early conciliation element into this regulation.
Okay, thanks for that. Anyone has any questions? We're only considering the policy implications at the moment. The SR comes back to us next week.
Yeah,
next week, so people will vote to pass it on through or not. So are we content? Are members content then that the policy implications of the proposed legislation? Agree? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is an SR Construction Design Management Regulations Northern Ireland 2016. Clerk's memo is page 65, explanatory memorandum is page 67, and the statutory rule itself is on page 131. The statutory rule was considered informally at last week's meeting, and the SL1 was considered at the previous ETI committee prior to the end of the mandate, and it was content with the policy proposals at that time. So the rule, subject to negative resolution procedure, will come into operation on the 1st of August 2016. The examiner statutory rules, he's content, is he? Okay, fair enough. Yeah, he has considered. So if members are content with the SR, I just put the question, the Committee for the Economy has considered SR 2016/146 Construction Design and Management Regulations Northern Ireland 2016 and recommends that it be approved by the Assembly. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, thanks. Another SR, the Weights and Foods Amendment Regulations, Clerk's memos on page 167, explanatory memorandums page 169, and the statutory rule itself is on page 171. The statutory rule was considered informally at last week's meeting, and the SL1 again similarly was considered at the previous committee in the previous mandate, and it was content with the policy proposals at that time. The rule subject to negative resolution procedure will come into operation on April 2016. Has the examiner statutory rules reported on this yet?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
There's a new examiner who's just taken over.
Right, so if members are content with this SR, the question is that the Committee for the Economy has considered SR 2016-187, the Weights and Measures Food Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2016, and subject to the approval of the examiner statutory rule report, recommends that it be approved by the Assembly. Agreed?
Agreed.
That's great. Okay, some consultations. There's item 10, the departmental consultation on draft gas designation of pipelines order is at page 188. The consultation relates to, it was referred to others in one of the previous briefings, the proposed designation of part of the new gas pipeline from Maydown to Strabane for the purposes of common transmission tariff, Article 59 under the Energy NI Order 2003. A statutory 4-week consultation with key stakeholders will take place over the summer. Subject to the outcome of this consultation and further engagement with the committee, the Department aims to make and lay the gas designation pipelines order by October 2016 via a negative resolution in the Assembly. So I suppose the question is if people want to make any submissions, are we content to receive a summary of responses following the consultation and reserve the committee's position as a super consultee? Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. The next item is the Ofcom consultation on designing the broadband universal service obligation. This consultation relates to the design of a universal service obligation which would give everyone a right to a decent broadband connection on request. Ofcom has been commissioned to provide technical analysis and recommendations in relation to the design of a universal service obligation for broadband and is seeking views on its design. Similar position, either members can submit views or we can wait and see all of the consultation responses and then take a view then. Are we content to wait and act as a super consultee role? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Correspondence. There is correspondence on page 235 to the NISRA Department for the Economy on renewable electricity generation. Just that's for noting. Members content to note.
Agreed.
There's no other business been highlighted to committee office in advance. So the next time and date is next Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. in this room. So members content that the committee is now adjourned? Yes. Thank you very much indeed.
29. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room.